Good morning. I'm Michael Miller. I'm here to present the OZ3 Payload Engineering Integration Overview. Next chart, please. So I'll apologize ahead of time. I've seen a lot of beautiful pictures of payload science, and my charts have only words and no pictures. So bear with me, and hopefully you'll stay awake to the end. So basically our activity starts out, we have ICD engineers assigned after the payload becomes a serious payload, and they work with the payload developer on ICD development. We attend and support the design reviews, provide comments, hopefully keep the payload out of trouble in their design, perform analysis for stage analysis, identify any guidelines and constraints that come out of that stage analysis or any of the exceptions. We process requirements, exceptions. Verification products are tracked, reviewed, and approved. We support the human factors integration team, and the ISS payload label approval team supports the payloads. And we provide support for the acoustics evaluation of your payload and some design guidance there. And we also manage cold stowage assets that I'll list on the last page. Next chart, please. Okay, so early on in the payload development, we assign an ICD engineer, and their job is to work with the payload developer to develop an ICD. We typically try to do that at the PDR and have a good draft for the preliminary design review and a final baseline version around the critical design review. The ICD documents the payload interfaces to the space station. It doesn't document any of the internal interfaces that the payload has with, and track that with all the other payloads to closure. As the data comes in, the PEI team assigns the discipline experts to review the data, and our goal is, that your data comes in and it's good, it's clean, and it gets approved as is. Sometimes the discipline engineer may go back and say, hey, I think you missed a point here, can you clarify this, or you didn't really address this part of the verification, can you go back and do that? It may also be rejected. Say you sent in the wrong verification for the wrong requirement, that'll get rejected and you'll have to bring that back in. Any PERNs, which are changes to the applicable requirements since the ICD was approved, must also be assessed via the RCAR process. That's Requirements Compliance Assessment Report. And so basically you're going to look and see, did any of these new requirements affect my design, affect my verification? If not, you just send in a memo that says, no, we've addressed that, we've assessed that, and it's no problem. Or if it did, then you say, yes, we've assessed that, here's the changes to my verification, and we close that out. We include the PERNs that need to be assessed in our OZ COFR letters. Those come out at about 5 months prior to flight. Next chart, please. HFIT and IPLAT support. The human factors integration team basically helps out your payload development team by performing the verification for human factors interfaces. They use a team of astronaut and crew representatives, Boeing and NASA human factors experts. They complete all the paperwork necessary to close out those verification requirements. And we found that this is a valuable service because a lot of the payload developers are not familiar with these kind of requirements. And so these guys come in, they work with you on your design, they make sure it's all good, and then they close out your paper so you can close out a big chunk of your requirements with that process. And they can also support early development and give guidance, at your design reviews, or if you have questions. The ISS payload label approval team also provides a service to payloads. They review the payload drawings and photos of the payload hardware. They help you with your payload label requirements. They verify that you meet those requirements, and they assist in the ordering of the labels from the decal lab. Next chart, please. Oh, this is my last chart, I think. So the other thing that OZ3 does, in addition to the requirements and ICDs things, we manage the cold stowage assets that NASA owns. That includes the cold bags and ice bricks, and we've got several different temperatures of those ice bricks there listed. The Merlin refrigerator freezer, and it's also an incubator. And the Merlin currently is on board. The crew is using that in their galley for their vegetables and cold drinks right now. The Glacier freezer, can get as low as minus 160. I think we right now are planning to operate around minus 130. We had some payloads having difficulty verifying to the extreme temperature, so we've backed off to minus 130. But it has the capability to go lower if we need to. The Melfi, the minus 80 lab freezer for ISS, it's got several different temperature ranges. On orbit, we have several units of that. And that's really where we store a lot of the payload science, where we bring it home with glaciers and cold bags. The Melfi is our on-orbit storage of the science. The cold storage team works with the payload developers. They plan the assets needed for ascent, on-orbit, and descent. I also provide some testing support and fit check in the assets selected. And I guess I do have a few pictures of my cold stowage assets here. Now, I went through that pretty quick. I'm trying to keep you awake since I didn't have very many pictures. Did you have any questions or thoughts, especially easy ones I like? Nobody? Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned a list of the ICD type documents earlier in your presentation. Are they available online to look at? Because I can imagine knowing what's in them could dictate what research or science you could or would want to do.
Yes, we have them on our NASA website. I'm not sure that all of you can get to that. What we probably ought to do is probably ought to make a CD and distribute that. We have to worry about export control, things like that, so we can't just make it on a public website. But if you could indicate that you're a U.S. citizen, I think we could probably build a CD and send that to you.
Thank you.
That's probably something we ought to do as an action out of this. Thank you.
One of the other presentations talked about an experiment up there, spheres, where you can do algorithm data, but I didn't see it on your ICDs. How do you interface with that? And I think Ames is the one that said they own it.
Right, so we have an ICD with spheres, and they have documented their applicable requirements. So if you were using spheres, you would probably, any new hardware you would add to that ICD that we manage. So the list of books I gave you really was the requirements books that are used in the ICDs, but we have another really big list of ICDs with the different payload developers. And so spheres has an ICD. If you are just using the spheres and just doing algorithm development, probably there'd be no effect to our ICD. You would work with that team and they would set up your algorithms, but we've already approved spheres. We already have verification data. If you're bringing new hardware, we've had some payloads proposed to attach hardware to the spheres. Then we'd have to assess that. We'd have to add that hardware to that ICD and evaluate that. And then for the launch requirements, we'd have to put those in there too for that hardware.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.